Well, it's great to be with you. This is we get to speak around the country, U.S., around the world, but this is just a unique event. So it's really great to be here today. Just a little background about myself. I grew up outside of Philadelphia. Went to Catholic school my whole life. Went to Mass on Sundays, but other than that, was not really involved in the parish. Didn't do youth ministry or anything like that in high school. I graduated, went to Loyola University in Baltimore. I was a writing and political science major. I had absolutely no interest in working for the church. I did do some pro-life work there and thought after I graduated that I would go down to Washington, D.C., get involved in politics, get involved in pro-life politics, work for a pro-life congressman on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and maybe one day run for office myself. That was sort of my plan for my career. After about 6 months in Washington, I decided that it just wasn't for me. The ethos of the town didn't fit me. It was very clear this was not where God wanted me to go, although I don't even know if I would have put it in those words at that time, but knew I needed to try something different. At the same time, I was getting very serious about my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, Mia, and in fact, getting ready to propose. So all this was kind of going on in my life, kind of very clear about where I was relationally, not very clear about my career and what I wanted to do, when I got a call from a professor at Loyola that had taught me English. And she said, "Are you be interested in a career change?" And I said, as a matter of fact, I would. I'm trying to figure out what I should do. At the same time, I was kind of considering going back to school full-time to get a political philosophy degree, because I'd really enjoyed my political philosophy classes at Loyola, and I thought maybe I would go forward and study political philosophy and get a doctorate and go back and teach in a university at some point. And so all this was going on in my life when I got this call. So eventually, this professor from Loyola introduced me to Father Michael White and said about a youth ministry position. And so Father Michael and I met a few times, and eventually he offered me the job to do youth ministry at Nativity. And I was deciding whether or not I should take the job or not. And I was discerning, and I thought, okay, so I go back to school full-time, or do I take this position at Nativity? And I thought, you know what? If I'm going to get married, I probably should have a paycheck. And so I say I got into ministry for the money. All the people that with a gut laughed are the people who work at a parish. But obviously you don't stay in ministry for the money, or you're not very smart. And my plan, honestly, when I came to Nativity was I thought I'd stay there 2 or 3 years and then I would move on to something better. But what I found is there really is nothing better than working in a local parish. That is, others say, it is the hope of the world. And so all that we're talking to you today comes from our experience in a local parish, in the trenches. That's our really only authority that we can share with you today. And as kind of mentioned as we were introduced, we can say that some of the strategies we're sharing with you today do work. They have worked in our setting where we have, again, like nearly tripled weekend attendance, tripled offertory, tripled volunteers, and then there's a spirit at our parish on Sundays that you experience that is palpable. And so we talk to you out of that experience that we have from working in a local parish. We like to say this: we are the worldwide experts on evangelization and discipleship in a place called Timonium, Maryland in 2017. So we know what works in our context. We believe there are transferable principles that will work in your context, but we also leave that to you. You know your community. And just one final thing is this, that when it comes to running a parish or the new evangelization, nobody knows everything about it. When it comes to running a parish, we don't know everything about how to run a parish, and we're not responsible to know everything. But what we do have a responsibility and feel a very deep pull on our hearts is to take what we have learned, to take what's in our cup and pour it into your cup, and to share all that we possibly know. And so over the next few minutes, that's what we're going to do, is share what we have learned and what has worked, and the 3 key strategies especially that have rebuilt our parish.
Did you ever have an experience where suddenly you found yourself asking the question, why? It's a lively group this morning. Why am I here? Hopefully you're not asking that question right now. Why am I doing this? Sometimes it can happen at a party where you don't know many people and you feel uncomfortable and out of place. Or you step into a situation that is not exactly as advertised. And maybe that makes you a little angry or a little sad. It probably happened to you at school at some point or another. You were sitting in some class that you had to take and found yourself saying, why am I taking this class? I will never ever need this information. It's not really a big deal unless and until it is. Unless and until we find ourselves asking that question about major areas of our life, like our friendships, or our family, or your marriage, or your vocation, or your faith. In the busyness of life, the why question usually doesn't get asked soon enough or often enough, because we're just so busy running around, finishing off our to-do list, or getting through the week, or for those of us in parish life, getting to the weekend. We don't have time to ask that question. But asking and answering it is vitally important. It provides purpose and meaning. It adds value. It'll get us through the difficult times and make the good times even more enjoyable. Knowing why you do what you do matters. So why does the church exist? And why does the local church that is your diocese exist? And why does the heart of that local church, which is your parish, exist? And why do we do what we do there? When we first began working at our parish, we thought that our job, to the extent that we were self-reflective at all, we thought that our job was to provide service to church people. We came to a parish that was kind of a sleepy parish. That's what I would call it. A kind of a sleepy parish. And we thought the problem with our parish was just low energy, lack of programs and services. And if we invested our energy into programs and services for our parish members, then we would have a successful parish, whatever that might mean. Unwittingly, we fell into what we came to recognize as a consumer mentality, that the people in the pews should be thought of as customers, and we were there to help them consume whatever it was they were coming to consume: faith, religion, programs, faith formation, communion. And so both Tom and I, who for a while were pretty much it when it came to our parish staff, set about trying to do that with all the energy and enthusiasm we had. We expanded kids and student programs. Tom put together all kinds of activities to try and get teenagers involved, which basically meant getting them to show up. We launched new musical programs and offered concerts and all kinds of fellowship programs. We expanded devotions every place we could think of doing so. Receptions, bus trips, lectures. We expanded member care as far as we could dream up ways of taking it, from hosting complimentary lunches following funerals to coffee service following daily mass. So much of it was a waste of time. In hindsight, the situation was reminiscent of that old story. You know it, Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. Remember the Red Queen's race? And at a certain point, the Queen says to Alice, "Now here you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get anywhere, well, you're going to have to run twice as fast as that." That was us. That was us in our parish. The more we provided, the faster we had to run just to stay in the same place. But the more we provided, the more was demanded. Just like Alice, who didn't pause to reflect on why she was running that absurd race for the insatiable queen. We hadn't considered why we were doing what we were doing, or what we were accomplishing. The net effect of our efforts was creating consumers. You know that you're dealing with consumers when nothing is ever different after than before. We were creating consumers and then shaping them and cultivating them into ever more demanding consumers. All of this came crashing in on me during a program that we ran each Lent. We ran it for about 5 years, and it was a Friday night Lenten program. The program included Mass, there was Stations of the Cross, there was a featured speaker, there was child care, there were student programs, but the centerpiece of the whole evening and the chief draw was dinner, which we provided free of charge. You could make a free will offering if you wanted to, but there was no admission price for the dinner, on the theory that that would attract more people, which it did. Over the course of the 5 years that we ran this program, it grew to attract hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people every Friday night. It was called Family Friendly Friday. But it wasn't really that friendly. At least not to us who were on staff. Because we piled this program on top of everything else we were already doing. Because that's what we do in parish, isn't it? We never stop anything. We just add more. Well, the evening that I'm remembering was the sixth and final evening. By the time we got to that point in the series, every year it was like total burnout for everybody on staff. And think about it. This was Lent. We still had Holy Week and Easter, our busiest season of the year, up ahead. And we'd spent Lent burning ourselves out. Anyway, I was serving the dinner because that's what I thought I was supposed to be doing, and I was serving the dinner, and a lady approached me to complain about the food, the free food. And she was mean about it too. She was really nasty. And she was quickly joined by a chorus of like-minded individuals who all wanted to complain about the food, the free food. Something snapped. Some artery exploded. I knew in an instant I couldn't do this. I was wasting my time.
So why does the church exist? Because when we lose our why, we lose our way. When we lose our why, we lose our way. So why does the local parish exist? Well, to return and get that answer, we return to what Jesus said, as always. And Jesus gives us our why most clearly in Matthew 28. Matthew 28 is the final chapter of Matthew's gospel. It begins with the empty tomb narratives and it ends with Jesus' ascension into heaven, something we'll be celebrating in just a short while. And so it ends with Jesus' ascension to heaven. And so Jesus, before he ascends into heaven, brings together the 11 remaining loyal apostles and brings them together and says this: all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Now that sentence right there is packed with meaning. Really, to truly understand it, we have to go all the way back to Genesis. Because when God created the earth, he gave authority over it to our first parents. But we know what happened pretty soon after that. They lost that authority. when they ate the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they surrendered the authority God had given them over the earth to the evil one. And so the story of the Old Testament is a story of God preparing to send his Son into the world to win back that authority. And then Jesus comes into the world. And Jesus, for 3 years, he teaches, he preaches, and then he goes to the cross. He's beaten, he's bloodied, he's nailed to the cross, put a crown of thorns put on his head, suffered, died, and was buried, then rose again on the third day to win back the authority our first parents had surrendered. And now he brings together the 11 remaining loyal apostles and he says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Guys, I am now passing it on to you. I am giving you the authority that I have won back through my blood, sweat, and tears. Now, guys, I want you to take that authority and I want you to go. I want you to go and... Now think about what he does not say. He does not say, I want you to go and play bingo. Go and run potluck suppers. Go and run middle school lock-ins. As a former youth minister, thank you, Jesus, I don't have to run middle school lock-ins. No, he says this, and you probably know it, but he says this, go and make disciples of all nations. Right, so Jesus says, go and make disciples. Then he adds, of all nations. So in case the apostles were thinking, okay, Jesus, when have we fulfilled our quota? When can we stop? When are we done making disciples? Jesus says, no, you make disciples of all nations. That's why the church exists. Now, that's the mission of the universal church. But if you're like us and you work in a parish, your job's to make disciples in your parish. So what is a parish? Well, a parish is a geographical area. Our parish is not just the people in our pews. It is the people in our geographical area. And our responsibility, our mission that Jesus has given us is to make disciples of all the people in that geographical area. Again, not just the people in the pews. As one pastor likes to put it, your zip code is your mission field. That's the place as a parish we're to make disciples. Now, what are disciples? And again, we could spend a whole day on this, but we just say disciples are students who are learning to follow the master. You don't have to be perfect to be a disciple. You can still have a lot of bad habits and follow Jesus and follow the master. But a disciple is someone who's a little bit more like Jesus today than they were yesterday. He's putting the effort to be a little bit more like Jesus today than they were yesterday, and to be a little bit more like Jesus tomorrow than they are today. We say it this way: a disciple is a student, it's up there on the screen, who is growing, and that's the key word, growing through their work and efforts, but of course through the grace of God, growing to love God, love others, and make disciples. So disciples are growing to love God. I mean, it seems pretty obvious, but when Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. Love God with all you have. That's the vision of a disciple. And so, that begins with going to Mass. It continues through private disciplines like prayer and fasting and giving. That to love God with all we have means having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. As we read this past week in John 10, that Jesus says that he is the shepherd and that his sheep know his voice and they recognize the voice of the shepherd because of the intimacy they have with him, and they do not follow another because of that close personal relationship. That in growing to love God, we're offering all our lives back to God, as Paul says in Romans 12, offering our life as a living sacrifice. Our work life, our family life, our financial life, our recreational life, all of it. Now, the problem with a living sacrifice is that it can crawl off the altar. And so we need to continually be offering our lives back to God. So when Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said, love God with all you have. But then he didn't stop there, did he? He said, love God with all you have, and with all you have, and then and the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. You can't disconnect these two things. And so we see this especially played out in the letters of Paul, where he talks about serving one another, accepting one another, forgiving one another, encouraging one another. All these one another's. And Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. So it seems to be our ability to love others will fall to our ability to love ourselves. And so we need to care for ourselves and practice self-care. So Jesus said, love God, love others. But then we say, disciples love God, love others. But disciples make disciples as well. We see this played out all the time throughout the Gospels. When Jesus called the apostles, he said this. He said, follow me and I will make you. But Jesus didn't say, follow me and I'll make you smarter. He didn't say, follow me and I'll make you richer. He didn't even say, follow me and I'll make you holier. He said to the apostles, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. In other words, Jesus seems to indicate here that if we are really following him, eventually we will bring others into a relationship with him. That's part of following. The disciples make disciples. Again, we see this played out all the time in the Gospels. Think about the woman at the well. Here's a woman that had a past. She had a history. She had been married 5 times and was living with a man who was not now her husband. And so she is a social outcast in her town. And so one day, she will go to the well at the hottest part of the day, in the incredibly intense heat, to draw huge buckets of water to carry back into town just so she doesn't see anyone else. But one day she goes to the well, and there, unexpectedly, she meets Jesus. And there Jesus talks to her, accepts her, loves her. And so this woman who did everything she could to avoid her townspeople runs back to the town and says, let me introduce you to a man who knows everything about me. And everybody knew everything about her. But let me tell you, a man who knows everything about me, he loves me and accepts me. Maybe he's the Messiah. Out of that change, she went back to the very people she was trying to avoid. Another part of the gospel, Mark's gospel, tells us about the Gerasene demoniac. Mark tells us at one point, Jesus and the apostles get into a boat. They cross the Sea of Galilee. There's that huge storm. Apostles think they're going to die. Jesus quiets the storm. They get to the other side, right? And there's a man possessed by a legion of demons. And Jesus drives the demons out of the man into the swineherd. They run off the cliff. And then Jesus gets right back in the boat. He seemingly came all this way just for one person. And as Jesus gets back in the boat, so does the man who'd been possessed by a legion of demons. He tries to get in the boat with Jesus. And Jesus says to him, no, you stay here. You stay here. And you tell people what God has done for you. And apparently he did. Because the next time Jesus came back, there were crowds of people who were clamoring to hear Jesus' teaching and to be healed by him. So disciples are growing to love God, love others, and make disciples. And at a certain point in our story, we recognized we weren't doing that. We weren't leading people to love God more, to love others more, to bring others into a relationship with him. That we weren't creating disciples, but consumers. Our programs were not leading people to give more and more of their lives to God. And so therefore, we weren't succeeding as Jesus had called us to succeed.
Our journey took off when we humbled ourselves a little bit. We humbled ourselves enough to start learning from others. Eventually, we did the obvious thing that was not at all obvious to us for a number of years. We started looking to and learning from successful churches, by which we mean healthy churches, intentionally growing churches. And so we set out to learn from them, even if it meant turning to Protestants.
So our journey started at a place called Saddleback Church out in Orange County, California. So we had heard about the conference and went out there. And going out to Saddleback, it was like stepping onto a different planet. When we went there, we were afraid that we might be outed as Catholics in an evangelical setting. And so we were very, very quiet, very, very calm there, very low key there, and try to stay away from everyone.
I remember parking the car and approaching what I assumed was the church building, only to discover it was the nursery building. It was this big, beautiful, new glass, 3-story building, totally dedicated to Sunday school for nursery school students. It was incredible. I didn't understand what I was looking at. On the other
hand, go ahead. Do you want me to go? On the other hand, when we stepped into the church, it was pretty simple church. It kind of looked like a Walmart with chairs. And that was different for us as well, because when we had seen big, huge churches, were used to seeing marble and statues and all these other kind of things. But what was amazing about Saddleback was not the campus. I mean, what was amazing was the campus and all that. But what was even more amazing to us was the people of Saddleback. They were so much different from our people in our parish. They were so friendly. In fact, at one point, we went into a door and we were so warmly welcomed, we left and went out a side door to see if we'd be welcomed just as well again. And we were. And for both of us who had been in church our whole life, for Father Michael who had studied in Rome, we had never seen anything like that. We'd never seen a church so warm and welcoming. We didn't understand why that was the case, but we knew we wanted our church to be like that as well. It began to paint a vision for us of what our parish could be and should be. And so along with going to Saddleback, we began looking at other churches, studying some other churches. We looked at Willow Creek in Chicago, North Point in Atlanta. And as we studied these churches, we were getting outside our comfort zone. We grew in many different ways because we were getting outside our comfort zone. And I was looking at one of the tweets up here from Peter Herbeck last night about faith. And faith means spelled R-I-S-K, right? And that's all spiritual growth requires some risk and getting outside of our comfort zone. Growth is always outside our comfort zone. Something else that I think is critical from our going to some of these churches and studying them is that we were growing as leaders. And a growing, healthy parish is going to have growing, healthy leaders. If leaders are not growing, most likely the parish isn't going to be growing. I mean, look at 1st and 2nd Kings. I mean, and Samuel. You'll see that as the leader, the king goes, so goes the nation. And so leaders, for a church to be growing, its leaders must be growing. And by the way, those leaders don't always have to be the point leaders. You know, the leaders with by that I mean, leaders with the position. It could be other leaders in the church. But growing churches are going to have growing leaders. And as we went to Saddleback and North Point and Willow Creek and kind of studied these churches, we learned a great deal of many lessons. But there were 3 key strategies that we would say have transformed and changed our church, that have led to all the growth. And I'm going to share those in a second. Before I do that, though, I want to read to you this quote from a book called Switch. The book is Switch, How to Change When Change is Hard. Anybody here read that book? Nobody. Okay, good. You should read it. It's a great book. After you read our books, then go read Switch. So in any case, here's what Chip and Dan Heath wrote this book called Switch, How to Change When Change is Hard. And here's what they say in studying all these incredible changes. I'm going to put this up on the screen here. There is a clear asymmetry between the scale of the problem and the scale of the solution. Big problem, small solution. Big problem, small solution. This is a theme you will see again and again. Big problems are rarely solved with commensurately big solutions. Instead, they are most often solved by a sequence of small solutions, sometimes over weeks and sometimes over decades. As a church, we're here, and you're here at this conference for the New Evangelization Summit because we see a big, huge problem. As a church, we bring the most important news that there is, the greatest news ever, that God so loved the world, he gave his only beloved Son. We have the incredible news that you don't have to earn your way into heaven, that your Father loves you enough to send his Son to die for you, and that God has an incredible plan for your life. We have incredible news. I mean, that's what the New Evangelization is about. It's a big, huge, we have an incredible message, and yet the problem we face is that less and less people seem interested in it or seem to understand how important a message it is, and that churches are shrinking. That's a big problem. And as a church, what we tend to do is look for big, huge solutions. It's a series of small solutions, a sequence, as Chip and Dan Heath say. There's no spectacular, I would argue there's no spectacular grand plan, but small solutions taking over time, as it said, sometimes over years, and maybe it means over decades. So when it comes to our parish and what we think needs to happen, we've said there's 3 key strategies we learned. We said, number 1, what we learned from these churches, we need to change our focus from church people to unchurched people. That as we looked at churches that were growing, they had a clear focus on the people in their communities that were not coming to church. And they understood that mindset. And they understood how to attract them. Number 2, we realized that we needed to prioritize the weekend experience. And by that, I mean the weekend mass and programs that surround it. If you've read our book, we call this chapter, it's about the weekend stupid. And because we were the stupid, it took us so long to understand just the importance of this thing we do week after week after week. And so then third, we said this, that we needed to move church people to take out action or challenge church people to take responsibility for their faith and the mission of the church. See, we realized we had it all wrong. Whereas we had thought about the people in the pews as consumers, we realized, no, they weren't there to be consumers. They were there to be mobilized for mission. That we need to challenge them in 2 ways. Again, as I said there, number 1, to take responsibility for their own faith. That while we need the church and we need community to take the journey of faith, at the end of the day, that's a personal journey we must all choose to take and must all take responsibility for. It's not the priest's job or the pope's job or the bishop's job to make sure we're spoon-fed. We need to take responsibility for that journey. Then second, that they need to take responsibility for the mission of the church to go and make disciples. So we're going to pause here a second because we've been talking for a little while. And just throw up some questions and give you a few minutes to talk to one another. And so we're going to put those up here on the screen, I think, coming up in a minute. Just about. In a second. All right, there we go. Actually, skip that first question. We're going to go back to that. Is there another slide there? There we go. Is it a different slide? All right. Putting the slides down, let me just do this. Number 1, the church is clear about the decision to make disciples. That the mission is to make disciples. We'll get these up and fixed in a second. The church is clear about the mission is to make disciples. Why do we lose sight of that mission? Why do we forget to make disciples? What gets in the way? Second, what is there in your church that you need to stop doing? Is there something in your parish that you need to stop doing because it's not making disciples? And it's burning you out. And it's a waste of your time and energy. So I'll give you a couple minutes to turn and make a friend. If you don't have a friend, make one. And then we'll come back in about 5 minutes and we'll go on into these 3 strategies. Go ahead.